So I always love this when a narcissistic person rolls up and says, I'm sorry, I have to do my meditation practice and I'm practicing mindfulness. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the number of people you hurt every day is what I'm thinking. Really? I actually, though, I've got to be honest with you, I got to sometimes want to scream when everyone marches out mindfulness as the cure-all, as the answer to everything. Let's talk about this thing called mirroring. So let's start by asking or reflecting on, do you know why so many of you have fallen in love with narcissists or stayed in those relationships for such a long time? Because you believe they loved you and saw you like nobody has ever seen you before. Why do you keep going back to the narcissists in your lives? Because at some point in time, it felt like they got you, or at the very least, they know what makes you tick, and they push at those pressure points. How were they so astute? How did they know how to get to you? Because they are the masters of mirroring. First of all, why do we look into mirrors? We look into mirrors to see ourselves. It's not something we could do without a mirror or a photograph. An accurate mirror reflects back our face and our body. We may not always like what we see, but a mirror is just that. It's merely a reflection. Psychological mirroring is a different game. When someone mirrors us, they are doing a range of things. They may mimic us, emulate us, be interested in us, share our interests, try to be like us, point out our strengths, gently point out our weaknesses, and simply reflect us back. Healthy mirroring involves a person who sees us accurately and who allows us to see them accurately. It is safe, it is reciprocal, it is honest, and it is kind. People can point out our flaws in compassionate ways, and having those sorts of holistic mirrors leave us feeling safe, no more than you would want to look into an actual glass mirror and see a more distorted version of yourself that hides your physical imperfections. It may be nice for a moment, but then there is an emptiness and a wondering, what do I really look like? So let's talk about narcissistic mirroring, because that's a whole other game. Narcissists are masters at mirroring, and it can be really aggravating. It goes back to the point that obviously narcissists must have something in them that resembles empathy, because they are able to look out at themselves long enough to see our weaknesses and our sadnesses and our vulnerabilities and actually mirror them back to us. They had to be paying attention to get that, right? And if so, why aren't they paying attention anymore? The narcissistic mirroring process is less about seeing you in some meaningful way than it is about data gathering. The mirroring is often embedded in the love bombing process. They pay so much attention to you at that time that they are learning about you quite quickly. And many people succumb to love bombing and pull back on their boundaries and open up because it does feel so good to be mirrored. They are filing all of this information away, that sad stories of your past and the way you feel about your mother and your insecurities about how you look and your appearance. They remember it all. And down the road, when they need it, they will weaponize it. For example, in an argument, knowing how traumatic your relationship with your mother was, they will throw a zinger at you like, wow, now that you're mad at me, I can see you're actually just like your mother. And even as they say that, it cuts deep and they know it. Another common dynamic in mirroring is emulation, which can look like mimicking. This can happen in close relationships and it can happen in friendships, actually. The narcissist may actually start taking on your interests, like you do CrossFit, and now all of a sudden they are into CrossFit. A friend who is mirroring may modify her hairstyle to be a little bit more like yours, or someone might get a car like yours, or they may take a vacation to a place you are talking about. Now, this experience of emulation and mimicking can be both flattering and unsettling. While imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, it can also feel a little bit creepy and stalky. And if you do try to call them out, they will often then project onto you that maybe you're jealous of them and accuse you of being selfish and wanting to keep them out of your life. Under those accusations, many people second guess themselves and just assume that the narcissist is so into you and so interested in you and so trying to get to know you that they just want to become a part of your life. And in fact, you may judge yourself negatively. Mirroring also means that they try to get to know every single detail of your life in excruciating detail. Your family, your history, your preferences, your habits. And again, for most people, this seems flattering, or it's just a classical part of getting acquainted with someone. And because we often feel in our world that people are so disconnected, many people may feel that this kind of inquisition is how it should be. The issue becomes how intensive it is. Many times people are quite private and have learned to set and hold boundaries, and they may not want to push the fast forward button on getting to know someone, which is fine and it's totally appropriate. The challenge is that if you are not as forthcoming as the narcissist wants you to be, as into it as they am, as they are as part of this mirroring process, they may be put off and start using gaslighting, guilting, and shaming as ways of coercing you into sort of this mirroring dance. Mirroring is initially flattering, and the fact is, if you do have good boundaries and good instincts and you're willing to disengage when this mirroring experience almost feels overwhelming, and then you actually choose to not engage, the narcissist is actually going to get irritable and will often then move on to new supply. The problem arises when you don't detect it early and the mirroring gets protracted over a much longer period of time and you sort of get sucked in, because then the mirroring becomes part of a larger process of manipulation and control. What becomes interesting is the day that the mirror goes from light to dark. Initially, narcissists are really great at mirroring back all the wonderful things about you. It's why the love bombing phase can be so seductive and be so powerful, because the mirroring is so powerful. And for the first time, many people get that sense of overwhelming and effusive praise for someone. They've never felt anything like it. There's an old African proverb that says, "Beware when a naked man offers you his shirt." The same kind of suspiciousness should be happening here. The narcissist lacks a strong sense of identity. They also lack a strong sense of security, so their mirroring is at best an empty process, I guess. One day, the mirroring does go to a dark mirror. They start reflecting back all the things that are wrong about you, or now that they know what matters to you, they will devalue the very things that matter. They start seeing you through a pathological lens. At one point they wanted to go to church with you, and now they're diminishing your faith. And at this point, you think that you would run away because now it doesn't feel good. But you don't run away. Why is that? So here's the problem, especially during the dark mirroring phase. Mirroring works because, sadly, we sometimes agree with the distorted image that the narcissist sends back at us. Let's imagine that I look into the mirror. I'd expect to see black hair, brown eyes, brown skin. Now, if I looked into the mirror and I saw a person with a bald head or blonde hair or blue eyes, that would be deeply unsettling because that's not what I look like. Now, psychological mirroring is quite similar. We expect to see the truth, but we see what we expect to see. And that's where the mirroring of a narcissist gets very dangerous. They mirror back what we think may be true. So many of you grew up in homes where you received distorted mirrors. You may have been ignored, which is a bit like having no mirror. You may have been criticized, like having one of those funhouse mirrors that distorts you and makes you look like you gained 200 pounds or are 10 feet tall or something. You may have only been mirrored for certain parts of yourself. And that would be a little bit like looking into a mirror that only showed half of your face. We take these distorted mirroring experiences that we had as children and we take them into our adulthoods. And as a result, sadly, we don't always run away when the mirror that another person places in front of us is distorted. You don't run away when the psychological mirror in front of you is cruel or invalidating or unkind, because after all, that's what the mirrors of the past showed you. Now, mirroring doesn't just happen in romantic or intimate relationships, even though that's where it's most likely to happen because you're meeting someone as an adult. It can absolutely happen in professional relationships. For example, a colleague or a manager or a mentor may engage in a mirroring experience that can leave you feeling like you're being seen for your professional prowess and ability and promise in a really unique manner. But just like in any intimate relationship, the mirroring may be a form of data gathering and control, figuring out your pressure points. And then that vulnerability can be used against you in the future. It may even keep you in a suboptimal work environment because you felt so heard at one time and so confused at other times. And because it doesn't have the same intense feeling as a romantic relationship, the workplace mirroring can be much more difficult to detect. One of the things that can be so aggravating about mirroring is that it does fly in the face of the narcissist's lack of empathy or limited empathy. Obviously, they do have the bandwidth to engage with your emotional world long enough to understand that they understand you and they get the intel and the data. So now they clearly have the capacity to attend to another person, but only if it fits their needs. And ultimately, selective empathy is really not empathy. So why do narcissists mirror? At one level, it gives them something to do in a relationship, and it likely gives them a feeling of control, which they are often lacking in their relationships, as well as a tool with which to potentially control you down the road. Now remember, because narcissists aren't wired for intimacy, it isn't about true closeness and connection. Rather, it's a bit of an imitation game, and it's one that can be really deceiving. At the end of the day, imitation is actually not necessarily the sincerest form of flattery. It may in fact be a red flag. And maybe flattery isn't a healthy place to start a relationship from anyhow. I mean, avoid that funhouse mirror that is the narcissistic relationship and focus instead on the accurate reflections that you get from your healthy relationships. It's interesting. We like to think that narcissists love looking in the mirror because they love seeing their reflection. What they're actually even better at is not just looking in the mirror themselves, but creating these twisted mirrors of other people. And in that way, they capitalize on our own vulnerabilities and all the sort of negative ways that we view ourselves. They keep putting back this mirror that's equal parts distortion and then the parts of us that they actually stopped and took the time to learn. Those confusing mirrors, equal parts distorted and accurate, are what can often drag us into these relationships, believing that we're understood and then wanting to fight so hard to make them understand the rest of us. The fact is, when somebody puts back something on us that is a distortion, it's on us to step away from that mirror. But that also means that we need to be more accurate mirrors of ourselves. Let's talk about the concept of a cat and mouse, right? Many of you know that I have a cat whom I'm very fond of. She's a little indoor cat, so she doesn't get much of a chance to hunt unless an errant spider or moth gets into the house. But once a lizard got in, and it was actually kind of horrifying to witness her seemingly want to torture it. We managed to rescue the lizard and get it out of the house before she had a chance of even starting to finish the poor thing off. But I had to say I wondered what it was in her nature. Frankly, I did get her because there were some mice in the house. That's why I got her. But I wonder what it was in her nature, and every cat's nature, to play cat and mouse. So I did some digging, and going on a leap of faith here that the stuff I was reading was true. But a cat sort of plays with its prey, not for entertainment or to torture it. Torture is a very intentional thing, right? And I don't think cats understand that. but to exhaust the prey so the prey can't harm them. Rats and mice have rather sharp teeth, which could hurt the cat. So the cat, a larger creature, simply exhausts the prey until it can't harm them, and then it kills it. The exhaustion means that the mouse is no longer a threat, and when that's the case, then the cat goes in for the kill. Now, as always, I know this seems like a stretch, but when I was thinking about this cat and mouse thing, I linked it to narcissism. Because really, narcissistic relationships are just a game of cat and mouse. Now, sadly, in this scenario, the cat is the narcissist, sorry, Luna, and the mouse is the poor soul who's interacting, or which is interacting with the narcissist. It's what they do with people, right? They torture them, they play with them, and ultimately, they exhaust them so they cannot fight back. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the confusion, the invalidation, the word salad, the dysregulated rage, the constant shifting, it's exhausting. And when we are exhausted, we are no longer a threat. And I guess they think we can't harm them. We don't fight back. We may simply be too wiped out to end the relationship. We stop being able to take decisive action when we're tired, right? And that plays into the advantage of the narcissist. They play with us. There are good days, we think we're dealing with a decent person, and then bam, there is some kind of tantrum. We have a nice conversation, and then bam, they gaslight us. That's sort of a metaphor for how the cat bats around the mouse. The prey gets tired. We, as people who are being narcissistically abused, get tired. And then the cat and the narcissist, they go in for the kill. They take advantage of the prey's exhaustion and wait till it can't harm them. So what is the metaphorical kill for the narcissist? Basically that they manipulate and gaslight us to the point that we cannot fight back. We capitulate, we give in, we don't argue. We become something and someone they can take for granted. This game of cat and mouse, by the way, is not unique to just romantic relationships with narcissists. It can happen in family relationships, definitely in the workplace and with friends. They bat us around, they exhaust us, and then they may take advantage of us, or we just unseeingly give in. We no longer become a threat or a danger to them. Think of the number of times you have sat and listened to a narcissistic family go on the same tirade as always. It gets exhausting, and perhaps they're just breaking you down so they can, once again, take advantage of you. Now, with a real cat and a real mouse, let's face it, the mouse is kind of sunk. Cats are fast and nimble and made to hunt. Now, unless the mouse can book it and find a tiny little crack and escape, it's toast. With narcissists and their prey, we aren't mice. We know, though, so there's no little crack for us, but we know that we don't have to play the narcissist game, and yet we still do it. The misery of narcissistic relationships is generated by the backing and forthing, by the engagement, and by treating these interactions as though they are happening with a normal human being who actually cares about us. Like those mice, we are often toast in these situations too, because we engage, and for us, disengaging and recognizing the narcissistic folks for what they are is the equivalent of finding that little crack in the wall to run into. Or, in another scenario that has saved more than a few mice, the cat gets distracted. That actually is how we saved the lizard. One of us distracted the cat and the other one got the lizard out of there. But when the narcissist gets distracted, it may be by new narcissistic supply or something that's just more engaging for them, then they may look away long enough for a person in a narcissistic relationship to step out. So the game of cat and mouse usually works out for the cat. Simply understanding the narcissist's tactics and motivations can be enough to help you win at it. But also understanding that in the same way, the cat is able to destroy the prey by exhausting it, by making sure it's not dangerous anymore. It's crucial that we don't fall for their tricks and get exhausted. So we have the energy to set boundaries, disengage, and potentially get out. That's what makes us dangerous, the ability to do those things, right? Another great example of this, though, is something that we see in litigation. narcissists, they do love them a lawsuit. They also love being very vindictive. So if you've ever been on the wrong end of a narcissist in a money matter, in a divorce, in some sort of business situation, they are unrelenting, even in a negotiation, right? They're unrelenting. They will keep, again, batting the other person around, whether through litigation, whether burying them in legal documents, whether constantly changing the terms of a deal. And what that does is it leaves the other person, the mouse, as it were, exhausted. So often, narcissistic people will just use piles and piles of brutalizing litigation, the torture, the cat and mouse of it all, to break the other person down so they're no longer dangerous to them. And in this way, will often do things like force a settlement that the narcissist doesn't even deserve. But just because the other folks have gotten exhausted, that's oftentimes how the narcissist wins. So I hate to paint my cat out to be a narcissist, but on this one, unfortunately, the cats are kind of the narcissists and the mice are the rest of us. So let's talk about this concept of mind reading. This episode may end up taking a very different path than you might think. There's actually a lot of stuff out there about how narcissists think they can read your mind. They actually arrogantly get a lot of swagger from the idea that they are able to read other people's minds and read other people like a book and get what they want out of them, and that they can, they're almost like magicians. They can manipulate them and they can exploit their weaknesses. And frankly, sadly, this is true to a point. Some are really good at this, particularly the malignant narcissists who have that exploitative core that allows them to mine a person's weaknesses and use them for their own personal benefit. And no, narcissists are actually not really good at reading your mind per se. They're really good at being a salesperson, at listening to you long enough to learn your vulnerabilities and maybe even some of your preferences, and then store them away for a rainy day and pull this knowledge out in a way to put them at an advantage. Definitely not from a place of empathy. But that's not what this video about mind reading is about. I am talking about mind reading in another direction. In this episode, we are going to take on the idea that narcissists expect you to read their minds. Many times, a relationship with a narcissist can just feel like one big, fat misunderstanding. And the core of that misunderstanding is often the narcissist's core belief that other people should be able to read their minds. It's their grandiosity and egocentricity at play. Their grandiosity borders on the delusional. So they actually do believe that people should anticipate their needs and know what they want and make it all happen. And their egocentricity means that the narcissists actually do believe they should be the center of other people's lives too. This anticipation or sense that you are supposed to be reading the narcissist's mind can play out in several different ways. To start, it can actually be very simple. For example, you're supposed to know that they are hungry and what they want to eat and prepare that kind of food for them and present it at the appointed time. Another form of mind reading can be very intention focused, and this is where it starts getting really toxic. Let's think of the classical narcissistic trope, and this is one that often plays out in couples therapy as well. For example, you may, in good faith, go into couples therapy and indicate that your partner said something menacing or cruel or invalidating and share that thing that was said. The narcissist will then say something like, "You know I didn't mean that," gaslighting, or "What I really meant was blah, blah, blah," or "Please, you didn't really take that seriously, did you? You know I was still angry about last week. You know what that was about. It was about this other thing." It's frustrating as can be because no, you didn't know. And if there's one thing to know about all human relationships, is that there is a real danger in assuming anything, especially assuming a person's intentions. And the fact is, the reason so many people do get stuck in narcissistic relationships is that they are constantly issuing rationalizations for the narcissist's behavior. He didn't really mean that, or he just says angry things when he's upset, etc., etc. That may not be mind reading per se, but you can see how making assumptions about the narcissist's intent or reasons for their unhealthy behavior can be very tricky. And when you throw mind reading on top of all of it, it feels impossible. Narcissists are actually rather fragile. Obviously, we know that through their hypersensitivity and their insecurity, that often manifests in those ways. But we often forget it because they are so superior and so arrogant. And this can raise an issue of mind reading that can often play out with covert narcissists. Because covert narcissists are actually quite socially anxious, they do not do well in social situations. As a result, they may often really struggle in social situations, and then this can manifest them as being sullen and difficult and argumentative when you're in those situations. Afterwards, you may, in a moment of clarity, recognize that they needed reassurance and support to help them with their social anxiety. Again, that darned mind reading. But they would never ask for it because it would render them too vulnerable. I have spoken with many people who tell me that their inability to mind read leaves them feeling guilty because they feel as though they should have been able to sort of read their partner's mind or mental state. And because narcissists believe, yes, you should be able to read my mind because aren't I the center of everyone's universe? Then that whole set of assumptions can just drop more fuel on the fire. Mind reading can also be anticipatory. Remember, much as narcissists may really just be swaggering fools, they don't like to be seen as the bad guy. So they will sometimes go along on things that they don't want to do. For example, they may say, "Sure, we can have your family over for dinner," but no, they didn't really want your family over for dinner. If you went solely on the narcissist's words, the sounds coming out of his or her mouth said, "Yes, I want your family to come over for dinner. What should we have?" But that's not what they meant. And the dinner ends up being a fraught, tense mess. And your family really doesn't want to do it again, and neither do you. After dinner, the narcissist may even complain about it and whines about how it felt on a bad night and that your narcissist just went along with it to make you happy. You have to love them pulling that manipulative guilt punch at the end. Then it's not unusual for them to go on to say, "You should know that I just say yes to having your family come over because I don't want to listen to you complain about it later." And now you're in a double bind, a situation where you cannot win. You were expected to mind read and know that the narcissist never wanted them to come in the first place, and that now there will be a mess to clean up afterwards. In a narcissistic relationship, as this happens more and more over time, you can see how this can result in isolation and alienation. And that over time, you may just stop inviting people over, stop suggesting things to do, stop even attempting vacations or other special experiences, because even if the narcissist gives in and goes along with it, you run the risk of them obviously not really wanting to do it, and then you have to deal with their criticism, their contempt, their anger, and their bad behavior both during and after. And before you know it, your world becomes very narrow because you stop asking to do these things. And it's not because you are reading their mind. It's actually because you're trying to avoid the awful consequences because you can't read their mind. Now it's interesting because this issue of mind reading and the fallout from it is why couples therapy so often fails with narcissists. Now think about it. Traditional couples therapy focuses on communication and communicating in a healthy manner needs, wants, feelings, again, clearly, and taking ownership. So a couples therapist may send an unfortunate individual, basically when you go into couples therapy with a narcissist, you're sending that person into the lion's den because the therapist has told them to communicate. And so you do. You communicate. You communicate clearly about having friends over, or finally taking that trip to Italy, or hosting your sister's wedding. You give the narcissist the opportunity to share his or her concern. And then, boom, the whole thing blows up. You go back into therapy to talk about this. And you'd say, I did all the things you suggested. And then the therapist will say, no, keep trying. And so it's like the therapist is saying, you lost your right arm by sticking it into the lion's cage? No worries. Next time, just stick your left arm in. Communication like this does not work with narcissists because no, you can't read their mind. And even if you could read their mind, would you really want to have a relationship that's based on you channeling the narcissist's thoughts for them and responding in a way that works only for them? That's not a relationship. That's subjugation. Now, mind reading is a very problematic issue in narcissistic family structures. For example, narcissistic and invalidating family members who get angry when family members can't just anticipate what they want and just do it. Children who grow up in homes in which anticipation of mind reading or their capacity to mind read is a prevalent theme. These kids live on eggshells. They become exhausted at waiting for that other shoe to fall and always over anticipating the narcissistic parent's needs or trying to decode all of these situations, trying to read the narcissistic parent's expressions, anything to stay ahead of the need to mind read and avoid a blow up. Where mind reading makes all of these relationships so tense is that if you don't do it right, and you're not always going to do it right, it's going to be followed by rage. In some ways, mind reading and your inability to do it can explain a fair share of narcissistic rage. At times, they're getting enraged because you didn't read their mind. You didn't know that they had a bad day at work, or you didn't know that someone had hurt their feelings, or you didn't know that things were not going the way that they want. They just get more and more sullen and petulant and angry, and it builds up like a volcano. And you aren't the only guilty party. Obviously, nobody can ever read another person's mind 100% of the time. Let me tell you a story, because I'm brought to mind a dynamic I once witnessed of a deeply narcissistic boss and his assistant, who really was literally like a sycophant. I mean, he just followed him around, and he was devoted to this narcissistic boss to a fault. The narcissistic boss, interestingly, way overpaid this assistant for his work. And the assistant worked 7 days a week and was available to the boss man 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the boss man would regularly, without asking, disrupt his holidays, without even wishing him a happy holiday, his wedding day even, you name it. It honestly looked like, in a way, the assistant was just like chained to this narcissistic boss. But there was more than a little cognitive dissonance there, because the assistant was so overpaid, and because he lived so well because of his high salary, he knew that his skill set would not translate to anybody else in the world paying him even a fraction of what he made. Now, I happen to have proximity to the players in all of this, so I was actually able to watch it over a long period of time. It was actually amazing how often this assistant did successfully mind read the narcissistic boss correctly. Honestly, it felt like 75 to 80% of the time, which is really quite startling. The assistant, and if we were to almost take a page out of the movie A Devil Wears Prada, he would have the boss man's coffee in place, the lunch ordered, the items would be lined up on his desk. He would anticipate if it was a salad day or a soup day or a sandwich day. And if the good news, whether he had to share the good news first or whether he had to share the bad news first, like this poor assistant was on it. But if this assistant, got it right 75% of the time, that meant he got it wrong 25%. And heaven help you if you were around during the 25%. The narcissistic boss would literally say out loud, "How could you not know that was what I wanted?" Curse word, curse word, curse word. "Why didn't you figure out what I needed?" Curse word, curse word. And would then scream and rage and yell about how everyone was against him. And it's amazing that he, the narcissist, was so successful, because even though he was surrounded by such garbage people. And the poor sniveling assistant, who was the narcissist's primary enabler, would snivel more and try to get it more right. And then the narcissist would come down from his cruel, abusive tantrum, and not surprisingly, it would happen again in a few days. It was just awful to witness this dynamic, but it was stunning to me how much the narcissist genuinely expected this assistant to actually read his mind. And then it was actually stunning and terrifying, the amount of rage that would follow when his mind wasn't read. If you pointed this pattern out to the narcissist, by the way, he'd blow up at you too. Your inability to not be able to mind read the narcissist is not only one of the primary drivers of conflict in a narcissistic relationship, but also a primary source of tension. One day you do realize that they actually do expect you to read their minds, and that you will pay dearly if you cannot do so. Now listen, there is a beautiful, almost childlike hope we have that someone actually could read our minds. It feels magical, and it feels special, and to be heard the way, honestly, a child wants to be seen and heard. It can almost feel like the culmination of magical thinking. And in every relationship, it may happen from time to time for no other reason than coincidence. Someone just almost literally reads your mind like, "I wanted Chinese food too," kind of thing. But while narcissists are guilty of expecting mind reading from an antagonistic and entitled and grandiose place, catch yourself and ensure that you also may not be expecting it too, maybe from the most innocent space. Mind reading is simply not possible in a relationship, and it can actually be dangerous to do so. If you do not feel heard, Make that known. But obviously, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, sharing the idea that you don't feel heard is not going to matter. Listen, if I could read minds, I would be a very wealthy woman. And I think we'd all be wiser. And the fact is, if we could read minds, we'd also get our feelings hurt a lot more often because we know what people were thinking of us. But we can't read minds, thank goodness. And you might find that when narcissists expect you do, that it takes an already confusing relationship and makes it even more confusing. Leave the mind reading to the crystal balls and purveyors of psychic magic. And if someone expects it of you, please see it as the red flag it is. A lot of people use mind reading as a space to try to create some control in the relationship. This is what they want. I know this is what they want. And if we could just do it this way, everything will be fine. And it's, again, that eggshelly tension that builds up in you because you try to read their mind. Let's try to guess what kind of mood they're going to come home in. We don't usually do this with healthy people. It's a unique element of the narcissistic relationship that you feel compelled to mind read. You believe if you could mind read, things would go better. And in a sick twist, the narcissists expect you to mind read for them, whether it's what they want for lunch or why they say and why they do what they do. None of it's possible. And one more example of why these relationships really are impossible.
So, have any of you ever run into a person who's very narcissistic? They may be in your life, they may be someone you even know peripherally, and they claim to be devoted to mindfulness. They meditate every day. They talk about how important it is to be in the here and now. Do you know anyone like that? If so, drop it in the comments and let's unpack this. So I always love this when a narcissistic person rolls up and says, I'm sorry, I have to do my meditation practice and I'm practicing mindfulness. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the number of people you hurt every day is what I'm thinking. Really? I actually, though, I've got to be honest with you, I got to sometimes want to scream when everyone marches out mindfulness as the cure-all, as the answer to everything. However, as a therapist, I grudgingly acknowledge mindfulness is actually an incredible tool, but it's not a magic tool. Mindfulness orients us to be present so we can be self-possessed, self-aware, well-regulated, empathic, and available, again, and present in the moment. Now, all of that stuff I just said sounds like the opposite of narcissism. So why do narcissistic people tend to gravitate towards this idea of, I want to be in the moment, and I want to be present, and meditate? Because I got to tell you, they do love this stuff. So again, let's unpack this, because they may even use their love of meditation and mindfulness as a weapon against you. And they'll say, I meditated today and I'm centered and present. And this will be after they gaslighted you. So it gets interesting, right? Because I personally have worked with lots of narcissistic clients over the many years. And I have to say, good mindfulness work is exactly what should work. And it's something I've tried to work on with them, to teach them and be with them, teach them to be present and aware so they can account for context and other people before they respond or speak or act. And ideally, that would get them to a place where they are less abusive and less ragey and less attacky and cruel. What happens, though, is that because narcissistic folks are so thin-skinned that if they perceive a slight or a threat in the moment, they behave in their usual reactive narcissistic way. If you call them out on it, they say nonsense like I said, I couldn't help it. And then, when they aren't so thin-skinned and feel safe, maybe sometimes they'll even get it right. But you can set a clock on the fact that their reactive angry behavior won't stop. If their usual triggers like abandonment, competition, perceiving disrespect, or jealousy get pinged, they could have been working with a Zen master, and all bets are off. They will go into their usual rage. So much for mindfulness, right? Now, this is awful for people who are in relationships with them, who will see the narcissist in their special meditation space, probably after chastising, yelling, and warning everyone to not interrupt them while they meditate. And the folks around them may think, well, yay, they're meditating. Maybe this is going to work. Maybe they're going to chill out. Probably not. It may just result in them getting angry that you at some point will likely interrupt their meditation and then using it as a weapon later on about how they're so mindful and you are a slovenly, sloppy fool who doesn't have your meditation practice, which is really just holy gaslight because they just don't see it. So much for mindfulness. Now, another thing that narcissistic folks love about mindfulness work is that it is focused on staying in the moment, staying in the now, which for them is read as code for, I can do whatever feels good right now because I'm staying in the moment, I'm staying in the now. So the person at the bar was hot in the moment, so we made out in the moment. They really actually do believe that. I know I was supposed to be home for dinner 4 hours ago, but I was just staying in the moment and having such an amazing conversation with this new intern at work. I am sure you were. So that's how they weaponize the being in the now, basically as a seeking out of pleasure. Narcissistic folks want to cherry pick all this mindfulness, meditation, be present stuff. They want to use it as a rationalization for impulsive behavior, be self-righteous and get validation for being so evolved that they meditate every day. They use buzzwords like mindfulness to force other people to listen to them, saying things like, well, can't you be more mindful while I'm talking to you? But interestingly, they don't seem to internalize it the same way for themselves and aren't so mindful when other people are talking with them. Ultimately, an empathic person is a mindful person. They are able to shift gears even when it doesn't work for them, because an empathic person understands that someone needs them. Self-aware people are self-aware. The mindfulness is baked right in on the basis of their self-awareness. The danger of buzzwords and trends like mindfulness and meditation in the modern era is that they've become like a parlor trick. Like the folks who go on the meditation retreats and silence retreats and breathing retreats, but then come back from these retreats and still keep raging at the people in their lives and take the self-righteous position of, oh, I can't believe I have to be with people like you who don't know how to breathe right. So this isn't really about mindfulness at all. It's about being empathic and self-reflective and compassionate and self-aware and well-regulated. Those are things a person simply is. Mindfulness on top of that, well, that's just great. But keep this in mind. Mindfulness is not a substitute for empathy and self-awareness. You can't be a mindful and present asshole. The empathic self-awareness pieces are what matters. Not someone bizarrely staring at you and claiming to be mindful, but simultaneously being cruel. Lots of narcissistic folks have their spiritual advisors on speed dial, figuring they can guru their ways to grandiosity and goodness. It's not how it works. The work of being empathic in a world that is anything but, of seeing other people's perspectives, of regulating ourselves at uncomfortable times, that is simply personal responsibility. And there is no retreat that can circumvent that. So the next time the narcissistic person in your life is extolling their gurus, their mantras, their meditation, their breathing, and their mindfulness, after having them recently throwing an entitled tantrum, mindfully disengage and walk away. Let them take that rage to their guru and see how that works out for them. How many of you have had a situation where you're in a narcissistic relationship, but you really got stuck because that narcissistic person ended up helping your family? So when you wanted to end the relationship, it got real messy. Drop that in the comments. So what do? If a narcissistic person rolls around, someone who's in your life, and they help your family. Now, I know some of you are thinking like, what? A narcissistic person helping my family? Like, that's ever going to happen? I know that's not a modal experience, but sometimes it really is. It's a very specific video, but I know that this is a theme that's affected more than a few people. So you are in a narcissistic relationship, more likely sort of a long-term relationship or maybe a marriage. The narcissistic person is successful enough, and enough so, maybe that they can offer help to your family. And maybe it's not even because they're successful, but they do offer help to your family. Maybe it is financial. Maybe they pay for a vacation. or help by giving someone a car, or maybe it's even bigger a ticket than that. They pay down a house, or they pay college tuition for someone in the family, or they purchase them a car, like big, big ticket stuff. But it is, in fact, a narcissistic relationship. And let's say this is a sort of a romantic, intimate relationship. You, as their partner, may be enduring the worst of their behavior. And now, your family may have become somewhat dependent financially on the narcissistic person. What do you do? Because even if your family was once team you, now that that financial largesse has come into the picture, you may now find yourself with fewer places to turn and have watched your family, if they weren't already there, fully indoctrinated into the sense of beholdenness that comes with someone giving you lots of stuff and goodies, in this case, with the narcissist. I have worked with and talked with several people who endured this, though this is not nearly as common as the miserly narcissistic person who's not generous. But it is amazing to me how pliable people become when someone picks up the check. What a great guy he is. He paid for dinner, or she's such an angel. She upgraded our flights. Now, while those things are nice, they're not substitutes for being a decent human being. But I think enough people are living close to the bone that when financial salvation rolls up, in whatever form it rolls up, people are willing to forgive a lot of sins. For the narcissistic person who has financial resources, it's such an efficient play. All they need to do is spend money, which they have, and then they don't need to waste their time with empathy or self-awareness or respect and kindness. They just need to lay down their credit card, and then they get validation and adoration and even respect. And it keeps them in the dominant position, and in fact, other people beholden to them. But remember, it's not always money. It may very well be that the narcissistic person fixes stuff around the house, fixes the house itself, fixes the car, do favors. Maybe they go and get advice from a friend who is a physician, or a friend who is a lawyer, or they give some other form of free advice that would otherwise be expensive. That also counts for generosity. And so your family may feel deeply beholden, and in their cognitive dissonance, to keep that sort of helpful gravy train rolling, will need to paint you as the bad one. Oh, they're so helpful. What are you saying? Must be you. None of that feels good. This can really confuse and infuse a person going through narcissistic abuse with self-doubt, thinking like, oh, maybe my partner is a good person. They paid for this, or they did that. My family's doing better now. Everyone's really grateful for the help. If I leave this relationship, then my family may be in a worse place or less supported. And you have to be honest with yourself. You may lose the support of your own family because you're cutting that off. So this generosity thing can keep people stuck for years and years. And not just stuck, but also without support or empathic ears, because so many people have been bought and paid for. Your family will be more likely to tell you that your standards are unrealistically high, or that you are a rotten person who asks too much, or that you actually want them to suffer. Against that kind of criticism, it can be really hard for a person to hold their ground. This is going to be such a stupid example, but in fact, I remember years ago watching the film Titanic. There was that fictional character, Rose, the redheaded lady, who had a narcissistic mother, and she had a narcissistic partner. She was sort of like the center of the story. And the partner, the narcissistic partner, paid for the mom's stuff too and gave the mom social status. So the mother had no problem throwing her daughter under the bus to be with the abusive narcissistic partner. Now here's the thing. Most of us don't have a sinking ship and a vagabond suitor, Jack Dawson, to save us under these conditions. But that idea of generosity keeping someone stuck, it's the stuff of stories, right? This sort of pseudo-generosity is such an interesting and troubling narcissistic pattern because, again, it confirms how transactional these relationships are. Narcissistic folks often give to get dominance, authority, favors, validation, adoration, respect, control. The giving silences dissent and sort of leaves people in their sway kind of stuck. And when it happens with your family, it's a really unique situation because you have to balance the benefit to your family and the harm to you. You don't have to, but that's what people do. And many people relent and stay in the narcissistic relationship because it can feel like the safest and easiest path forward. Relationships are obviously interdependent. Your intimate relationship, and there's families around you and all of that. And there's going to be some version of the doing and all of that. But you might be shocked at watching a person who is so gaslighting, so manipulative, so negating, who's rolling up and taking care of things, whether financially or practically, for your own family. It's confusing, it's frustrating, and it can leave you stuck. It can be really, really hard to make a decision that you know may actually ultimately inconvenience your family. But then you really have to ask yourself, is your life meant to be sort of a sacrifice so your family can get whatever free stuff they're getting? And make no mistake, if your relationship with a narcissistic person did end, and they have done all these things for your family, don't be surprised if they show up with a bill. Thanks again.